Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar here with HYCU. Very excited about this one. This is going to be a workshop focused on data protection in the context of Atlassian Cloud. The procedures, the follow-up that you'll learn today regarding how to build out a DR backup runbook within cloud is something that you will be able to use not only in Atlassian Cloud, but any other cloud-based and cloud-hosted application that you use as well. For those who are joining us, maybe learning the Atlassian ecosystem or leveraging another tool chain as well. Before we actually get started with this webinar, just a couple housekeeping items. So if you have any questions, avoid the chat and actually leverage the Q&A function. This is something we always do, and people always use the chat, so please use the Q&A function. What I'll do is I'll be continuously monitoring any questions that you have. I'm going to do my best to answer those questions live, but I will dedicate at least 10 minutes at the end of the session to go every single one of your questions as well. This session is also recorded, and you will have access to the content in this session as well. So if you have a colleague who's not going to be able to make it, you'll be able to have an on-demand link to share with them, along with the contents of the presentation as well. So with that, for those who've just now joining the bridge as well, my name is Andy Fernandez, and I'm your host today for today's HYCU webinar and workshop focused on data protection in Atlassian Cloud. Regarding the agenda, we're going to go over a quick introduction. I'm going to give a little bit about my background specific in data protection and why that relates to today's discussion. But we're going to review how systems of work have changed, especially those in the Atlassian ecosystem know exactly what I'm talking about when we talk about systems of work. We're going to talk through really navigating this gray area of what am I responsible for, what am I not responsible for in a cloud hosted versus a server and data center version of a product. And we're actually going to go through a full series of questions that you want to document when you're creating your runbooks, when you're looking at backup and DR for a SaaS application specific to Jira and Confluence in today's context. And then from there, we're going to take a little bit of a look at how HYCU can help you protect the Atlassian system of work as well. So with that being said, for those who just joined, my name is Andy Fernandez. I'm the Senior Director of Product Marketing. A little bit about my background and why I was very excited for today's conversation is I've spent my entire adult life and career focused on data protection, for better or for worse. Whether it is physical, virtual, or SaaS infrastructure, I've been focused in working with top leading companies in data protection. I run product marketing here at HYCU, and I'm very, very excited about this conversation and for your time today. So let's dive in. Well, for those who might be thinking, well, what is haiku? How do I actually pronounce that? Is it a Japanese poem? What is it? Well, it's HYCU. It's how it's spelled, but the company is called HYCU. And our mission is to build a safer world through universal protection of data. We have backing from investment groups all over the world, specifically Bain Capital, A-Crew, but also organizations that prioritize data protection within their own technology stack, similar to Okta Ventures, Cisco Investments, and for today's conversation, Atlassian Ventures as well. But our main goal, our focus, and our vision is to build a safer world through the universal protection of data, no matter where it is. We're globally recognized and trusted. We are protecting some of the most critical workloads in the world. With over 4,600 organizations protected, that number changes for the better every day, in over 78 countries. And we are explicitly focused on always working with channel partners. And in today's context, specifically with Atlassian partners, we have over 36 Atlassian partners who trust HYCU to deliver data protection. And we'll always be able to introduce you to partners if you need support there as well. And a little bit about HYCU and our industry recognition. When you think about data protection, regardless of Atlassian, but just data protection as an industry, as a whole, we are the number one in our net promoter score with over 91 score in our net promoter score for data protection. We are recognized by Gartner for enterprise backup and recovery. We were the Google Cloud Partner of the Year for 2024 and a leader in the Cloud Native Data Protection Radar. Data protection, it's in our blood, it's in our DNA, it's what we do best, and we're very excited to share our learnings, our engagements, and even our advice on how HYCU protects its Atlassian applications as well. But before we get started into the runbooks exercise, actually let's take a little bit of a time travel situation here. And let's go back and I actually want to hear from the audience because I want to make sure I got some of these logos right. And I want to make sure that we got the tech stack correct here. But if we go back to 2008, right? Forget what we call the system of work today, but simply whatever you use in the DevOps and ITSM tool chain. What were the applications that you were using? And I'd love to hear on the Q&A or in the chat if folks want to share, making sure I got the Jira Server logo right, but whether it's Subversion or Visual Studio, what were the services that your organization used specifically on-prem to build software, to ship, to manage, to track, to manage knowledge? So I'd love to hear, and I'll follow up on the chat if anybody wants to share back when maybe they first started or in, nearly over 20 years ago, what kind of services they were using. And I'm going to pause for a few seconds to see if anybody wants to add any of the services that they were using and if they used any of these that I've shown here as well. Let's see. Okay, yeah, obviously Jira Server. We've got a couple folks using Jira Server and even the old BMC days as well. But there's a point to showing this. There's a point for this whole time travel exercise. And the reality is that every single solution, every product, every tool that was used in DevOps and ITSM was hosted on-prem as server or data center edition. Everything lived essentially in a castle, meaning that your IT organization had full control of these applications. So if someone made a mistake, if there was a repository that was deleted, if hundreds of bugs were accidentally deleted or service requests or any type of knowledge, if there was a mistake, if there was an outage, if there was a corruption, if there was an attack, then you could always rely on your IT organization to give you the ability to recover. Why? Because this was hosted essentially as a virtual machine or even as a physical machine as well. And you had a single backup and recovery tool to be able to go and recover that. Your team was relying on services like Commvault or Veeam or Veritas, and they were using these applications that were also hosted on-prem to perform daily backups and then recover these VMs. You could always trust that there was a runbook, that there was a system in place, that there was a technology, that there was testing. And recovery was extremely straightforward. Now, if we fast forward to today, it's a little bit different. And the claim that we're making here is that it has never been easier to lose and harder to recover critical data. What do we actually mean by that? Well, think about today's as a service tool chain. Kind of conflating here DevOps and ITSM, but you get the picture. We're taking a look at all of the services. By the way, this is only a fraction of the applications and platforms out there for DevOps to be able to build, plan, integrate, deploy, and operate services. But none of these are primarily leveraged anymore as server or data center services. The main consumption model, and especially what the platforms are driving, is a SaaS-based consumption model. And it brings a ton of value. Why? Well, it brings you scale. You no longer have to manage everything in the data center. You don't have to manage security. You don't have to manage a lot of the failovers and high availability. And you can simply just subscribe to it, use it, scale as you need, or scale down. And that brings a lot of value. But it brings a completely different threat landscape and perspective that we have to have. But I'd love for you to take a look at this and kind of identify, what is your organization using? If you're on the app administration side, you're an Atlassian specialist, you know exactly what you're using. But on the IT side, do you know what your organization is actually leveraging to build, run, and deploy applications? Where is knowledge managed? What are all the other services that are being used in collaboration? What does that system of work look like? I can guarantee you that the majority of these are now consumed as a service versus server and hosted. Now, what does that actually mean? Well, first of all, data loss, it's not theoretical. Especially in cloud and SaaS, there's this gray area nebulousness around, well, it's the cloud, it should be fine, that's not my problem anymore. But the reality is that outages happen, deletions happen, mistakes happen, regardless of the application. All of these cloud services, by the way, we fully endorse, we use. They are the future, they are the most flexible, they provide the best feature set, it is the way to go. But we have to make sure we understand the risks so that we can protect them effectively and not be caught blindsided. And the reality is, when you look at any of your applications, there are very specific ways that you can lose data. I'll give you an example. We went through this exercise, and we use GitHub as an exercise here, but this also applies to Bitbucket and GitLab. And we went through within our engineering organization, kind of identified what are all of the scenarios and ways where we can lose data in GitHub. And what we realized was there's so many unique ways where repositories could be deleted or branches corrupted or force push errors. There's so many ways. And we actually wrote an entire blog on this that we can share after the webinar. But the point here is that just because something is in the cloud does not mean it's infallible. And it doesn't mean that it's not easy to lose, delete, or misconfigure data. And if you actually look at it in the context of Atlassian Cloud, this is based on an assessment we've done within our customers and all the organizations that we're protecting. And when we look at the scenarios that they come to us when they're looking for backup and recovery, we notice a couple of things. We notice that human error is always going to be something we can all depend on. If there are humans touching software, we must assume that humans will delete things within the software. It's simply something that we've seen all the time. Whether we've seen folks delete entire projects, we've seen small attachment deletions that happen all of the time. Whether from the attachment to the project level, we have seen it all. But we've also seen configuration mishaps. We've seen folks change object types in assets or completely change the structure of certain configurations as well. Even delete the automations themselves. Another, I would not say underrated is not the word, but something that people generally don't look too much into are insider threats, especially if your organization is using tons of contractors or you have many more employees that you can name or recognize. You are now in danger of an insider threat. And there's, of course, going to be automation errors. There's even third-party risk. This is something we've seen across all cloud applications, and of course, external cyber attacks. But the point is, there are a myriad of ways to lose and delete data, especially in SaaS and cloud deployments, and we have to be aware of them before we build out these runbooks. And I just wanted to share, this is my favorite meme, but it really shows you, especially, and I think this is something that both the Atlassian admins, but also IT admins, who are the ones who get the call when something goes wrong, can think about. Before, anything that went wrong in the application, in your tech stack, anything that went wrong, you know that you had a backup tool that you can go to and you can simply recover. Hey, this is what we have available to you. We had a last point in time. We're going to restore to that. I hope that works. But today it's a little bit more nebulous. We have all these tools, different people have paid for them, different people are managing them. There's no real documentation. There's no real way of understanding who's responsible for what. And all of a sudden, these deletions are happening. Whether somebody completely deletes a repository that has all the YAML files where Lambda functions are stored, or somebody has deleted service request tickets, or even knowledge within Confluence, or assets within JSM, or even epics deleted by the quote unquote intern. The point is, it's never been more difficult to be able to effectively manage data protection for your tech stack, especially if you're in IT and especially if it's your responsibility, but maybe you have limited scope and knowledge of what different teams are using for systems of work. But the point here is to make this very clear, to understand what is our scope as users, whether it's Atlassian Cloud or AWS or GitHub or Google Cloud. And from there, how do we build out runbooks that make sense for your organization? And the best way to think about using SaaS applications is to actually think about it as a parking garage. And I'll give you the example. So when I go to a parking garage, what do I expect? I expect to be able to drive in, that the lights are on, that I can pay for it, that I could drive my car in, park, leave, and then when I come back, I have my car and I could leave. And I've used it to essentially park. But if I leave my window down and somebody steals my laptop, or somebody scratches my car or hits my car and I don't have insurance, the garage and the owners of that garage take no responsibility for theft or damage to the vehicles. It's our responsibility. It's my responsibility. The same thing happens to cloud services. Now, Atlassian does leverage disaster recovery and backups for system level, meaning if the garage lights go down, they have to turn it back on. But if I leave something or make a mistake in my tenant, it's not Atlassian's responsibility to recover that because it's impossible for them to understand, well, what is a simple cleanup versus a deletion versus a mistake? It's structurally nearly impossible for Atlassian to be able to help all of their customers recover data anytime they make a mistake. And that's why they have the shared responsibility model. We can share a link to those, but we're going to kind of go through this quickly because I think for everyone in this audience, you're fully aware that you're responsible for backups in Atlassian Cloud. But just to make sure that we're clear, what Atlassian does is essentially says, look, we have system level backups, we have system level DR, but your role is to make sure that you can create backups of your own data. Only you know what you've deleted, what's important, what needs to be recovered. And only you really have access to understand that. So you have to create backups of your data and recover with that. But a lot of folks might be thinking, well, we're a large account. There's no way they'll say no to us. If there's a deletion, I'm sure we'll work something out. And the reality is that's true. Atlassian support and customer success team are incredible. They're going to try, but sometimes they simply don't have access or the ability to help. And here's a story from now a HYCU customer, the city of Tartu. And this municipality made a mistake that we see all the time. This is normal. And they accidentally deleted several IT assets, thousands of IT assets, simply because they changed the naming of objects. Now, the first reaction was to ask Atlassian to go and recover. And the response that Atlassian provided was simply, look, this is your data. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to help you this time. That doesn't mean that Atlassian doesn't try, but the point is that you can't guarantee that Atlassian themselves and support will be able to help you recover data. The reality is that you have to take responsibility for your data, not only in Atlassian, but whatever applications you're using in the system of work. So with that being said, now that we've kind of fundamentally understood that we have to create a backup and DR plan and take responsibility, what does that actually look like? I've seen 50, 100, 150 page run books, especially from my days in disaster recovery and high availability from a virtual machine perspective. But it doesn't have to be that complicated in the world of SaaS. There's a couple foundational questions that you're going to want to ask your organization and yourself, and to simply start preparing the run books and the documentation that's necessary for this. So first, it's the documentation, the scope, and the role. There's very fundamental things that we have to answer here. First of all, why are you actually creating the runbooks? Are you doing it because there's a compliance exercise in place, or because you've been tasked to develop data protection strategy? And the reason I mention this is because the frameworks are very different. The approach is very different. We have customers and organizations who must comply with DORA or NIS2, and DORA and NIS2 mandate backup and recovery of applications that are critical to the organization. So the framework and the runbooks that they build have to be much more specific to the requirements of DORA and NIS2. But other organizations, especially in the enterprise, are tasked with making sure that there's a business continuity plan. Understanding that is going to help you frame how you prepare this document as well. The other piece too, it's what is the actual scope of what you're doing? Meaning, what are the applications that you're creating these runbooks for? And is it just for Atlassian, or is it for the system of work? Potentially, you are an administrator focused on Jira, or you're within the IT organization and your responsibility covers things outside of Atlassian that you use. For example, GitHub or something like Miro that you're leveraging. If they have critical information, you might want to include that in your scope as well. And when I include scope, I don't just mean applications outside of Atlassian, but also critical plugins. I'll give you an example. Tempo timesheets. Is that something that you want to make sure that you're able to protect the data inside of Tempo? Is that valuable to your organization from a billing perspective? You have to kind of go through all of these plugins and understand, well, does this plugin have data inside of Atlassian? Is it stored in a Jira field where if I recover Jira, then I'll get Glyphy back? Or is it something like Tempo timesheets that stores data outside of my instance, and I need to make sure I have control of that too. So it's really important to understand what plugins are mission critical, which ones are not, which ones are stored inside of your instance, which ones are stored separately. That's a really big decision to make because it will impact how you approach your backup strategy as well. The other piece too is who's mandating this. Is it from the security side, from the compliance side, or from the infrastructure side? These are important questions to ask because it'll also change how we build these runbooks. And of course, something that I'll stress throughout this is avoiding single points of failure. We've seen this where organizations will create a runbook and it's one person on the IT team or somebody on the Atlassian team, or they get sick, they go on vacation. Nobody knows what the backup strategy is. And even if it's documented and they might not know how to use it. And so you have a point of failure here that you might want to avoid. We've even seen folks who were simply exporting their sites and instances and then having them in a hard drive, but guess what? They weren't at the office. So these are dependencies that we have to think about even before you start creating this runbook as well. And then it's the actual backup strategy itself. We're going to go through these step by step because I think it's the most critical part of today's conversation. Very important. RPOs, recovery point objectives. Essentially, how frequent do you want to have these backups? Is the change rate high enough here where you need to have backups every 4 hours? Or is a daily backup going to suffice in your organization? We have organizations that we look at that are updating, creating hundreds, if not thousands of repositories a day. They like to create very frequent backups simply because of the change rate. Other organizations are happy with a daily. A lot of the times we see daily as something that's solid as a decision for your organization, but it's your choice. And some projects might be much more important than others. You have to make that decision. Another critical part though, and sometimes this goes unanswered, is, well, how quickly is the business actually going to recover? So if there is a project deletion, worst case, how quickly can we get that back? What are we going to do in the meantime? What's our SLA for this? Sometimes with tier 1 virtual machines and production apps, you have specific SLAs that are time bound. But for the applications that are in your system of work, you don't always have those SLAs. Those SLAs are no longer part of the data center. So you have to think about, what does that SLA look like? The other piece too, especially if you're doing a compliance exercise, is, well, how long do you have to keep the backups for? And are you keeping the backups for simply to make sure that you have a point in time to recover from, or are you keeping it from a data retention use case? For example, HIPAA or DORA or something in the financial industry. And of course, encryption. When you are creating this backup, when you are restoring the data, is this encrypted? Is it encrypted at rest and in flight? Is there any point of weakness here where critical data can be accessed in an unencrypted format? And the biggest decision that you'll have to make is, well, how are you going to perform these backups? And you have a couple choices. The least popular one, of course, is going to be manual exports to a hard drive. Poor intern. But the 3 ones that we see is organizations might think, well, they're backup APIs. We can do some bulk exports and then recover entire sites from that. The other side is there's improved native tooling from Atlassian to be able to do so. There are limitations there on the recovery side, on the retention side, and how often you can perform those backups, but there are options there for you to consider. And of course, third-party backup options like HYCU as well. Now that's just performing the backup. Now, when you're making this decision around backup, here are a couple things to keep in mind, because a lot of the times, obviously, free is always going to be the most popular choice. I could just build it myself, then I think we'll be okay. Now, that may be totally fine for your organization, but here are just a couple 8 specific scenarios where you might want to think about third-party backup. One is you have very, very strict offsite data retention requirements with logging requirements for DORA or for HIPAA. You might require offline access to data in case of an outage. You need rapid granular restore of this data in case of any type of significant data loss, especially if your apps touch production. You might have some very large projects and instances where even performing the backup is way too lengthy, let alone the recovery. And you need something that's more API driven that allows you to perform granular recoveries. If your applications have direct impact on prod systems, you really want to think about third-party backups. And of course, if you want to think about even seeding these workloads, sandbox seeding, recovering across instances, you might want to think about ways to do that via API and via third-party backup. And if you need multiple team members to be able to validate and perform these recoveries as part of a system, then we highly recommend a third-party backup. And of course, if you want to make sure that you're bulletproof against insider threats, it also makes sense to have a third-party backup solution. But we've only talked about performing the actual backup. What about, where does the data go? The data retention component is one of the most critical decisions that you'll have to make as well. We've already talked about it in the backup section, but it's important to understand, how long do you have to keep these backups for? We have customers who keep them for 30 days, 6 months, a year, up to 7 years. It all depends on the organizational and regulatory landscape that you exist in. Another key piece though, especially if you're evaluating third-party solutions, is, do you have data residency requirements? For example, if you're in the UK and I, do you have to run systems and keep your data only in UK and I, or in the US or Spain or Germany? You have to think through and make sure you have full awareness of the residency requirements. And also control. And what I mean by control is, You could offload the responsibility and keep your backups in somebody else's managed storage using a third-party solution. But potentially your organization might have some serious security requirements where data cannot leave the organization. It cannot be accessed by anybody else, and it needs to be in your storage, whether that's in the public cloud or on-prem. And if you're concerned with insider threats or some form of malicious behavior, you might have to think about, well, do we want to create immutable backups, essentially tamper-proof backups with object lock? Is that something we want to make sure that we have, which is basically a break glass copy of the data? And also, what does the encryption standards look like for this or for our data retention as well? So this is something super important first around how often am I going to back up? What am I going to use to back up? Where, how, and how long am I going to store the data? And then the most important part, if you've never tested your recovery solution, you probably don't have a recovery solution. It's very, very important to say that. Even for us at HYCU, we always urge to always test a recovery, simulated environment, or simply start performing regular testing. Get used to what that looks like because it's very critical. You do not want to perform your first recovery when an incident happens. You want to be prepared. You want the recovery workflows to be documented, and you want everyone to have access to this. So as we're preparing these runbooks, you have to think through the recovery procedure. Whatever solution you've chosen, whether that is script-based or a third-party solution, have you internally documented the step-by-step process? And I don't mean leveraging simply third-party documentation and saying, hey, this is how you do it, but inside your organization, is there immediate access to a step-by-step process of how and who is going to restore this data? And not only that, but what kind of scenarios you're going to be testing for. So for example, potentially you might want to test for different types of deletions. So whether it's a project down to the attachment, you want to make sure that you test for operational recovery, but also from a business continuity perspective as well. From an access control perspective, how many folks do you expect to be able to perform a restore? If your organization is small, you might be the only person in IT, well, then it's your job and you are a single point of failure, and that's okay. But if you are in a mid-sized organization and enterprise, you cannot be the only one that's able to restore. You want to make sure that it's not only documented, but people have access to be able to recover or to be able to perform recovery operations as well. Testing requirements are critical. How often should you be testing? We always recommend at minimum quarterly, especially for SaaS applications where you're simply testing restores via API. You should 100% be testing all the time. Different scenarios with different people. You always want to make sure your team is prepared. And make sure that not only do you document, but validate recovery times. If there's something that was deleted that's actually mission critical to the business, even in Jira or in Bitbucket or in GitHub, you want to make sure that you've validated those recovery times and you've set the right expectations with the team. Because if they expect something to be done within 5 minutes and it's an entire project or an instance, you want to set expectations. And of course, even if the worst case scenario, which rarely happens, but you want to make sure that you're prepared, is do you have offline readable access to this data in case there is an outage? If something happens and there's an outage for multiple days, do you have access to the data so that your team can at least do some work or access some knowledge? This is very, very critical in your process. Now, I'm going to monitor for any questions as well in the chat or in the Q&A section. So please, if you have questions around the runbooks, if you have questions, I'm happy to join the call. Our pre-sales team, our customer success team, we've helped countless of customers with creating a data protection plan. We are here to help you, regardless of your role, regardless of what you're trying to protect. We can always provide guidance. Data protection is our wheelhouse. It's our DNA. It's what we do. Now, what I want to talk about a little bit here is for those of you that said, well, I think I need to at least evaluate a third-party backup solution. I want to talk to you about how we at HYCU are able to not only protect the specific application that you might be thinking about right now, Jira or Confluence, but the actual Atlassian system of work and the tech stack, the tool chain that your organization is using. Now, when you look at the system of work, of course, there's everything from the teamwork foundations with Jira, Confluence, but on the software dev side, right? So Jira Product Discovery. This is something that we started using, and it became mission critical to us within 2 weeks. The amount of knowledge and information inside of that is critical. We started backing it up immediately. And you also have high velocity service management. But the part that often gets ignored, and I'm actually going to check into the questions in a section. Somebody asked a question on the recovery side, and Aaron, I promise I will get to an answer on that as well. But the part that folks need to think about very, very critically as well is, what are all of the applications that you use in collaboration with Atlassian in your system of work? Whether that is another Git repository, whether that is Figma, whether that's Microsoft 365, what are all the other applications that you're using? You might be responsible for those applications, or they might be somebody else who's responsible for it. But it's important that you can protect this with one third-party solution. And HYCU, who we've been protecting critical infrastructure for years across both cloud, SaaS, and on-prem as well, we can firmly say that we protect the Atlassian system of work. Protecting Jira, Confluence, product discovery, Bitbucket, Jira service management, and over 80 integrations that are used alongside Atlassian, whether that's GitHub, whether that's even something like Typeform or Asana or Salesforce, even your Terraform, stack sets, and templates. These are things that HYCU can protect across the entire system of work. And it's super important to understand this because you want to avoid also leveraging 5, 6, 7 different tools, solutions to perform backups for SaaS applications. Especially as you go through this Runbooks exercise, you want to make sure that you keep things as simple as possible so folks know that when there's a deletion, when there's a mistake, when there's an outage, you have one solution that you can trust to be able to access, protect, and restore your data. Now, with that being said, when you grab all of the applications in the Atlassian system of work, and maybe even your critical infrastructure, what HYCU is able to do, and our platform is called R-Cloud, that stands for resilience, is being able to give you essentially 3 things. Being able to always visualize this data and actually understand, where are my applications? Are they protected? Are they in scope? Which department is protecting them? Am I actually assigning backup policies? Are those policies working? Is that data safe? Is it stored somewhere that complies with what we've asked for? And can I rapidly recover either entire workloads or single objects or single items as well? That's very, very critical. And this is part of the R-Cloud platform and something that we can do not just for Jira or Confluence or GitHub, but for every integration that is inside of our marketplace. Now, I'm going to say the second most important thing here is your ability to trust the backups themselves. Everything that we do is purpose-built, meaning that we dedicate and isolate engineering resources to be able to focus and build something as it should be. Whether that is Google BigQuery or Confluence or GitHub, there is a full focus in design to protect that using the native APIs and find ways to make sure that it's protected the way it should be. We call that purpose-built data protection. No agents, no scripts, nothing, just fully focused on building data protection the way that it's meant to be built. The way that we approach this is you should not be spending more than 5-10 minutes a week on HYCU for backups. This is designed to be set and forget, meaning you can create your own backup policies or simply assign a backup in a prepackaged backup policy in one click. HYCU will do the rest. We will orchestrate the data. We will make sure that your logs are there. We will notify you when your backups happen. You just have to make sure that you assign the backup policy. A critical piece that we'll cover is also that you keep control of this data. Essentially, this data doesn't go to HYCU and HYCU stores it. This goes to your storage location of your choice, whether that's AWS or Dell or Wasabi. That is your choice, and you get to store that data as it requires. And of course, you have the option to always make this resilient to make sure that it's ransomware proof and enable immutable copies as well. But that is just the backup side of the house. As we talked about, it's the recovery side of the house. And I saw a question here specific to this. Now, the questions that we have is a lot of folks asking, well, what can I recover? At the end of the day, we're able to recover everything from a project down to the attachment that is supported by the APIs. So, for example, if you're thinking asset management, we can restore object schema. We can restore specific issues. We can restore repositories, projects, you name it. What I'll do too, Aaron, is I'll share a full breakdown of everything that could be restored. Not only restored in bulk, but also restored individually back to a point in time as well. And that's what HYCU is able to do. I'm giving you here an example of some of the recovery options where you can potentially say, well, somebody's deleted our Confluence or Jira automation. And we don't know how to bring it back. We didn't have any documentation on this automation. Well, with HYCU, you can restore that automation end to end and simply re-enable it once the restore is complete. But the point here is it's about speed. Simply having to recover every project every single time is not sustainable. Think about all the potential incidents in your organization. Whether you are somebody deletes an attachment or an asset, you want to restore really quickly, especially depending on your SLAs. Having the ability to select a granular point in time and recover is going to be very, very critical. Now, where does the data actually get stored? This is something that I want to make sure it's very, very well understood. And I'm giving you here an example with AWS. But HYCU, we're storage agnostic in the sense that whatever your organization is using, we want to make sure that we give you the freedom to store the backups in that data as well. So here's an example of AWS, but you can store your backups in any public cloud repository, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud. You can use alternate repositories like Wasabi, not repositories, but storage buckets, sorry. Or you can go on-prem as well with Dell ECS or other options as well. And what HYCU is able to do, first of all, is you can run HYCU in your region, in your residency. The data is encrypted at rest and flight. The data is stored in your account. HYCU does not store your backups. You control the residency. You control all of the security, networking, access management settings of this bucket. It's stored on an S3 bucket according to the storage tier of your choice. And you can enable immutable object lock copies as well. So the point here is that you always have a copy of this data that is available to you at any point in time. And I'm going to let everybody on this call in on a little bit of secret, but later this month, you're also going to be able to export this data within your organization. So even if there is an outage, you can go to that bucket and export this data and access those backups in case there is a very, very lengthy outage within Atlassian as well. And that'll work for Jira, Confluence, or Jira Service Management as well. But the point here is where this data is stored is very critical. You want to make sure that you have access to it, no one else. HYCU allows you to choose where that goes. And finally, something that's very, very important is you also have complete control over notifications, logging, and access control. Part of your runbooks, you're going to want to document everything according to this. First of all, from a security perspective, you want to enable MFA. You want to be able to have logging and tracking for every activity. Did somebody log in? Did somebody assign a backup? Did they perform a recovery? Who performed that recovery? This is something you want to keep track of. You want documentation and reporting across the board. You can enable webhooks, whether it's an email or even a Slack or Teams message, whenever a backup is completed or a restore is completed. And something that's very important is you can enable access control. So whether it's an administrator, a backup operator, a restore operator, or even lower and lower, you have the ability to choose and provide access to those folks. And of course, always provide restore testing with event tracking itself. This is very, very critical to think about, especially when you're considering third-party solutions. Will it help you make sure you always have logging? Does it integrate with your existing systems, whether it's a SIEM or Jira Service Management as well? So with that being said, one of the things that we've done is for a lot of organizations, even in the US, if you have financial customers in Europe or you're in the financial industry, you're going to have to go through DORA compliance. And if Jira is a high profile application of your organization, then it's going to have to go through DORA compliance and mandate third-party backups. And what we've done is we've compiled a checklist that you can scan in this QR code. But what's important about this checklist for anybody who's not in financials, I still recommend taking a look at it because it just follows best practices. Best practices to understand how to effectively protect SaaS applications like Jira. This is free. Everyone has access to this. This is something that's based on our knowledge, our experience with customers, and our expertise in data protection. And of course, you have the ability to try this for free yourself. And I've got a couple more questions. So I'm going to try to do my best. I know with the time's coming up, I want to make sure that we can provide any questions. A lot of different questions. So a couple of things that I want to reiterate. The granular recovery, I will share a document that has all of the granular recovery capabilities that we have down to the attachment level, for example, a Confluence or a Jira attachment. When it comes to storage being available, we always highly recommend that you leverage your own storage for security reasons. Adding one more company having access to your backups adds to third-party risk. If you are the only one who has a break glass copy that no one, even in your organization except your team, can access, is the safest approach. But you might be thinking, well, in my organization, I don't have direct access to an S3 bucket. We can help you enable that. We can show you. We have dedicated customer success engineers that at no cost will help you understand how to pick the right bucket, how to enable it, and we'll work with you and your IT team. But we always recommend that you try this. And from a partner training, especially if you're on the practitioner side and you're an Atlassian partner, we have an entire partner portal, certification processes, everything to do to help you help customers and your Atlassian customers as well to be able to train as well. I got another question as well around API limits. Something that we've done and it's pretty novel, and we'll follow up after the call, is to make sure that these backups, no matter the size of the instance, happen effectively and managed within the throttling that Atlassian provides. And we can provide a lot more insight into how we do that, but you can rest assured that this does not intensely impact your Atlassian instance as well. So if you have any other questions, I will make sure to follow up via email. You can reach to me directly at andy.fernandez@hycu.com, or you can go on our chat and talk to us as well. So with that, I want to thank you all for your time. I want to thank you for your attention. One last thing, if you don't have your phone available and you couldn't scan the QR codes in the chat, we put links to both our free trial, but also to the DORA checklist as well. But I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for your attention. And I want to mention that we are here to help you with these runbooks. And I'm happy to jump on a call and help you and provide expertise at no cost. We want to make sure that the most important thing is done, which is actually protecting your data. So with that being said, thank you so much for your time, your attention, and we hope you have a great day.